Hello, everyone. Welcome to the TDWI webinar program. I'm Brenda Woodbridge, and I'll be your moderator. For today's program, we're going to talk about blockers and accelerators of data democratization, security, and privacy. Our sponsor is Satori. For our presentations today, we'll first hear from Fern Halper with TDWI. After Fern speaks, we have a presentation from Yoav Cohen with Satori. But before I turn over the time to our speakers, I'd like to go over a few basics. Today's webinar will be about an hour long. At the end of their presentations, our speakers will host a question and answer period. If at any time during these presentations you'd like to submit a question, just use the Ask a Question area on your screen to type in your question. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, click on the Help area located below the slide window and you'll receive technical assistance. If you'd like to discuss this webinar on Twitter with fellow attendees, just include the hashtag TDWI in your tweets. Finally, if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, use the Click Here for a PDF line there on the left middle of your console. In addition, we're recording today's event, and we'll be emailing you a link to an archived version so you can view the presentation again later if you'd like, or feel free to share it with a colleague. So again, today, we're going to talk about blockers and accelerators of data democratization, security, and privacy. Our first speaker today is Fern Halper. Well known in the analytics community, Fern has published hundreds of articles, research reports, speeches, and webinars on data mining and information technology during the past 20 years. Fern is also co-author of several dummies books on cloud computing, the hybrid cloud, and big data. At TDWI, she focuses on advanced analytics, including predictive analytics, social media analysis, text analytics, cloud computing, and big data analytics approaches. She has been a partner at industry analyst firm Hurwitz and Associates and a lead analyst for Bell Labs. Her PhD is from Texas A&M University. So Fern, I'll turn things over to you now.
Great. Thanks, Brenda, and hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar about data security and privacy. We know that you're busy, and we appreciate you attending. So I'm going to kick things off and talk about some of the market trends that we see at TDWI, and specifically the trends around the evolution to the cloud environment and the rise of multi-cloud, and what that means in terms of challenges for data security and privacy in these kinds of environments. I'll talk about the importance of central policy enforcement, and then I'll hand it over to Yoav from Satori to describe their solution. All right, so let's talk about some of the market trends that we're seeing at TDWI. So the first thing is that we see more organizations currently collecting and planning to collect all kinds of diverse data. So this chart comes from a 2021 survey where we asked about the kinds of data organizations are managing and planning to manage. You could see that the green is managing now, and the purple on the chart is managing in the next year, so meaning that they're going to start to manage this now. So you could see that organizations are managing structured data and transactional data. Those are those long green lines there on the top, so that's no surprise. But if you look down towards the center of the chart, you'll also see things like internal text data like call center notes, semi-structured data, like JSON, and external text data like product reviews or brand mentions. So all of this data, which is all at above around 30% or more, collecting this data now, and then you could see the purple lines, meaning planning to also collect more of that data. All of that data is in the early mainstream, and it's slated to grow. And then if you look at the bottom of the chart, there are newer kinds of data too, such as machine data, image data, audio data, video data. These are at about 20% in use now, but they're also slated to double if users stick to their plans. Of course, users don't always stick to their plans. But this illustrates that, there's definitely a lot of interest in there and movement that way. And analytics is a key driver, obviously, for democratizing data and analytics for use. And so what we're seeing is that there's high volumes of diverse data that organizations want and need to be managed, and that data also needs to be governed and secured. And not only, is there this diversity of data, there's also this move to the cloud to help to manage this data. And what we see is that very often the on-premises data warehouse doesn't meet the need for volume and variety and performance that organizations need, so they're turning more to cloud platforms. And so here, this is from another 2021 survey, we said what platform tools, infrastructure are currently part of your data and analytics environment, and respondents could select all that apply. And you could see, of course, that respondents already have things like data warehouse on premises. 52% of the respondents to this particular survey have that data warehouse on premises, although I will say that number is lower by about 10 percentage points from what we're used to seeing, so that's interesting. But what I've blocked off in the red there is that organizations are also using data warehouses in the cloud. They're using data lakes in the cloud, and so you could see that the data warehouse in the cloud is at about 38%. I've seen similar numbers in other surveys that we've done. The data lake in the cloud in this survey is upwards of 30%. I've seen that number higher. Of course, just because you have a data warehouse in the cloud doesn't mean you have a data lake in the cloud. Typically, we're seeing about 50% overlap, so you could have one or the other or both. What's also interesting here is that if you look at the bottom of the chart, two up from the bottom, you could see that the data lake on premises is only at about 16%. So the respondents to this survey, and I've seen in other surveys, were more likely to use a data lake in the cloud, to be storing all of this diverse data, than the data lake on premises. And then, of course, it's not just about one cloud environment. This could be a multi-cloud environment. So the multi-cloud environment is one where organizations use multiple cloud providers to supply infrastructure, applications, and key business functions to the organization. So, the Amazons, the Googles, and Microsoft and so on. So it's basically a services model. Instead of a business using one vendor for everything, for their hosting or storage or some applications, in the multi-cloud configuration, they use several. And so the point is that in a multi-cloud environment, I can use different clouds and cloud providers where it suits the workload. And there are a number of benefits to this multi-cloud approach. The first benefit is that you get more features and services, so you can take advantage of the best features and services of each cloud provider. And business units within an organization often have different cloud requirements, and some providers may be a better match than others. You might want one cloud provider for your hosting of some of your applications, and then another cloud provider you think provides better machine learning algorithms. So you don't have to pick one cloud provider. This is enabling better flexibility. We also hear companies talking about the fact that a multi-cloud strategy enables them to avoid vendor lock-in while capitalizing on the different services that the major cloud providers offer. They also talk about things like compliance, so organizations have to comply with certain regulations. For instance, some organizations need to have their cloud provider in certain regions based on their location. So multi-cloud lets organizations leverage the best cloud provider per region, if that's an issue for your organization. And another benefit is that multi-cloud reduces the risk in terms of disaster recovery. So if there's a problem with one cloud provider, you can have another cloud provider to turn to, so in case you need failover. Well, what we see at TDWI is that for those organizations using the cloud, the average number of cloud providers that they're making use of is 2. So it's not just one, it's more than one. And some are making use of, obviously, more than 2 cloud providers. So I have here that the result is a very complex environment, because while there are benefits to using a multi-cloud environment and the cloud environment in general, it can be a complex environment. So, for example, in the multi-cloud world, there are different tools for different clouds. So you need to be skilled in the different tools on the different clouds to be able to manage across all of those different tool types. So you want to be able to manage your cloud environment, and in order to do that, you're going to need to be using the different tools that the different cloud providers are offering. And then there's going to be a learning curve for each of those tools. And then, of course, you may be using the cloud to support some of the regulatory requirements, and that's good, but that can also add complexity. You know, if you have data on one cloud in some version and you have data on another cloud, you know, how do I deal with that? Dealing with the policies on different clouds can be a challenge. And then monitoring the whole environment, monitoring across these multiple cloud environments, which I'm showing by these cartoon-like clouds in different colors, that can be complex too. So how do I manage all of these processes? You know, am I optimizing the use of various cloud environments? The sprawl can lead to unused resources or resources that keep running when they shouldn't. So organizations do need to be proactive and manage across their cloud environments. So this is from a management point of view in terms of managing across multiple cloud environments. Of course, there are also going to be security and privacy challenges as well. So let's talk about that. So here I say, you know, these are challenges. So these are the kinds of challenges that we see organizations talking about when they talk about moving to the cloud. So they're talking about, you know, managing data silos and managing complexity and the cost and the performance. One of the top challenges that they talk about is governing across these multiple cloud environments. So governance, we see data governance in general as a top priority and a top challenge for organizations, you know, but then governance also rises to the top of the stack when you ask about the cloud environment as well. And security and privacy are also challenges that organizations are facing in this cloud and multi-cloud environment. If you think about it, the sheer volume of data that's being created, right? We saw all of those diverse kinds of data that organizations are collecting. They have, you know, huge amounts of structured data, and then they have unstructured data and semi-structured data on top of all of that. We see organizations on average collecting hundreds of terabytes, tens to hundreds of terabytes of data. There's a group of about a quarter of respondents to our surveys that are collecting petabytes of data, and they're using this, as I mentioned, to advance their analytics efforts for self-service and machine learning, and they're putting a lot of that data in the cloud. So you're creating a high volume of data and you're putting it in the cloud. How do you know what is sensitive data that's in the cloud? How do you secure that data? You know, especially as you start to think about cloud data lakes, you know, where you may be putting a lot of that data. And then, of course, there's remote work during the COVID era. So we have COVID, we've had to move to remote work, and organizations were quick to spin up cloud, but are they protecting the data? Because they did this very quickly, and with this fast move, there's multiple data vulnerabilities that are exposed, you know, across these enterprise networks. There's also new regulations. Of course, regulations are changing all of the time, and how do you secure and maintain privacy controls in a complex environment, right? That complex environment may be on premises and in the cloud. It may be multi-cloud. So it's this complex environment that you have to deal with all of these new regulations. And people want to access their data. As I was mentioning, they want to use it for various purposes. And although cloud providers have built-in controls for managing your authorization and access privileges, a multi-cloud strategy would require you to maintain multiple user access systems simultaneously. So if you have multiple clouds, they each have their own access system, you're going to have to maintain multiple access systems simultaneously, and you're going to have to keep consistent policies across multiple platforms. And without a centralized control system, that could be a very big logistical challenge. So, we're saying, and I had mentioned in that first slide, that you sort of need a central framework, because otherwise, basically, what you're doing is you're juggling different consoles and dashboards to ensure privacy. And of course, each cloud provider has its own set of tools and standards and settings. So it can get pretty challenging. So there are different organizations out there that have looked to put frameworks in place to help to manage data security and privacy in the cloud. The Cloud Security Alliance is one of those organizations, and they've had their security frameworks. Recently, they came out with a new version 4.0.3, that came out in June of 2021. I have the URL at the bottom of the slide here if you're interested in that. And in terms of data security and privacy, so there are all these control domains in the Cloud Security Alliance framework. And in terms of security and privacy, there are 19 different control specifications that they have listed in their framework. And that includes things like inventorying data to determine if it's sensitive and then classifying it. It includes making sure that someone owns the data. It includes data protection by design, meaning that you're embedding data protection and privacy features and technology into the project at the design phase. So it's by design. It includes impact assessments to understand what risks you have with cloud data and how to minimize those risks. It includes dealing with sensitive data transfer and data protection and a lot more. So I've listed some of those on the left-hand side of the slide here. On the right-hand side, I've just given you two examples of how they position some of their controls. So, for example, one of the controls says it's important to create and maintain a data inventory, at least for any sensitive and personal data. So another, and this is in the cloud context, remember, another discusses the importance of defining, implementing, and evaluating processes that ensure any transfer of personal or sensitive data is protected from unauthorized access. So you can see, permitted by the respective laws and regulations and so on. So they go through and they have 19 of these, in this data security and privacy domain. There are others that talk about data centers and other cloud concerns. So that's one example of a framework. But of course, people, processes, and technologies all have a role to play when it comes to how data security is applied. So here what I did was I separated sort of the process into three parts, evaluation and inventorying, protection, and then enforcing data security and privacy, of course, enforcing while enabling self-service, so sort of balancing, being able to use data with being able to actually analyze the data. So the first one is around evaluating the data and assessing the risks. So this includes inventorying the data, which includes also understanding and classifying and managing data. I was mentioning that with regards to what the Cloud Security Alliance was saying in terms of, getting an inventory of all of the data that you have and understanding it and classifying. Is it sensitive? Can it be classified as public? What type of data is it? So the second is to protect the data, and that is going to include restricting access to sensitive data. So this includes who is authorized to access the data. It includes, and when are they authorized to access the data, and how do you give them authorization? It also includes things like obfuscating the data when needed, and that includes techniques like masking or encryption. And then there's enforcement, and that includes meeting compliance objectives, meeting audit and assurance objectives. So, for instance, producing reports that illustrate that you met the audit objectives, for completeness and accuracy of input or update or whatever the audit objective is. It also means keeping up to date on regulations that are changing all the time and making sure that cloud providers are providing any necessary updates along with your organization. And of course, there's also monitoring and alerting. What we see at TDWI, though, is that there's often low visibility into these cloud environments. And as I was mentioning, these disjointed security tools and a lot of manual reporting and no continuous monitoring, but there should be continuous monitoring. And I put down here also train, and what I didn't mean training a machine learning model. I actually meant regular security awareness training and company-wide, pushing this company-wide security culture to ensure that data security becomes part of your working environment. I would bet that most of you out there, haven't necessarily been to a training session. So, what we see in the market, though, in terms of some of the security and privacy, is that while the majority of organizations agree that the cloud is the future of data management, you can see here that 70% agree with the statement that the cloud is the future of data management. That's in that red box on the left there. And 56% even agree that multi-cloud is the future of data management. What I'm going to show you is some statistics from two different places. One is an analytics maturity model, another is a best practices report. TDWI does a lot of assessments. One of them is our analytics maturity model. And what we see in terms of organizations, 1,400 organizations, I think, have taken this analytics maturity assessment. What we see is that for most organizations, security policies exist for sensitive data, but not for all kinds of data. Additionally, organizations don't necessarily feel that they have the right policies in place for understanding different data sources. So they're sort of rating themselves in the middle of the road in terms of dealing with security and privacy. Additionally, in a recent best practices report, close to 50% of respondents said that they had issues of data security and identity management and access authorization, that was a major challenge. So this is in this purple box from that best practices report. And we saw that the third most common challenge in that survey is regulatory compliance and protecting sensitive data. So this shows that the importance of ensuring that governance and monitoring of sensitive data extends to cloud-based data. And, if you look at some other data in terms of the encryption and masking, you could see that 38% of respondents in another survey said that they currently utilize data masking. 34% said that they currently utilize data encryption. So some overlap there, but they're saying that securing sensitive data is a challenge. So what's required? So here I've listed some requirements for privacy and security in this cloud and multi-cloud environment. And the first is that I think that security should not be an afterthought. I don't think it's an afterthought, but I don't know that organizations are doing enough about it, because as organizations move to the cloud, they need to be thinking about security and privacy policies. They need to be doing this as part of their migration effort. So they should be thinking as part of their planning about the data. They should be thinking about how they classify the data. Is it sensitive data? If it's sensitive data, should they be moving it to the cloud? If they're going to move it to the cloud, how are they going to protect it? At TDWI, we have a saying when it comes to the cloud, which is don't just move, improve. And this is part of that. So some organizations do a lift and shift when they move to the cloud, and they're not necessarily trying to improve what they're doing or thinking through what their strategy should be around their data. So that's why I'm saying data should not be security should not be an afterthought. And the second thing is that there should be holistic policies that are connected among cloud providers. TDWI believes in, sort of holistic governance and holistic policies. It's basically decoupled from one provider, but, you have this holistic set of privacies. And what really organizations need is that they should have the visibility into these systems and basically sort of a single control plane or a single security layer across these multiple environments. And, that's the case whether it's a hybrid environment with some on-premises and cloud or across multiple cloud environments. And that's going to include things like a data catalog to help to understand the data. And that also contains a complete inventory of the data. It should include a single system to be able to centralize and manage policies across these environments. It should include the ability to do things like configure granular policies based on users and groups and data types. It's going to require continuous monitoring and action, and it should work across multiple types of platforms and bring this information together. And it should also be automated where possible. So, for instance, you'll hear from Satori about how they can monitor database queries and results and then classify the data in motion. So, things like that. I have some other examples of automation here. So, for example, the data should be automatically identified as sensitive, so whether that be PII or PCI or other sensitive data. We see many tools now having machine learning as part of the software to be able to identify personally identifiable information like social security number. Well, you may not need a machine learning algorithm for that, but other types of personally identifiable information, your license number, other kinds of information. And there also, another example is automated access controls and approval workflows. So if someone tries to access data that they aren't authorized to access, maybe they get a blank result, but they would trigger a request for approval. So, it may be that someone wants to test the system, and that's okay. They could, ask for the request for approval. Likewise, but that's automated. Likewise, you want to be able to automatically monitor data usage to understand what types of behaviors or what typical types of behaviors look like, and then to block access if you're looking at something that's not a typical type of behavior. So you can look at the who, what, when are people accessing data, so the system actually understands the patterns of typical data access and can block access perhaps that's not typical. And you can also use context. So someone who shouldn't be accessing data does so, for example, at a certain time of day when they shouldn't even be on the system. So that would generate an alert that would be sent to the appropriate party. So those are just some examples of what you should be able to do in these systems that can basically sit above your other systems, your cloud systems, and get a holistic view and visibility into data security and privacy. So in summary, data is getting more complex, and organizations are moving to the cloud and multi-cloud environments to manage it. But what happens is that security and privacy controls may be different on different cloud environments. And so what we're saying is that you need a single control plane or security layer that's augmented and automated across cloud environments to be able to manage security and privacy and be able, to democratize data so that people can use the data that they're allowed to use. So with that, I say thank you, and let me hand it over to Brenda to introduce Yoav. So Brenda, back over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Fern. And just a really quick reminder to our audience, if you do have any questions, you can enter them at any time in the Ask a Question window, and we'll be answering those audience questions in the final portion of today's program. And yes, I'm now excited to welcome our next speaker, Yoav Cohen with Satori. Yoav is the co-founder and chief technology officer of Satori Cyber. At Satori, Yoav is building the company's technology vision and leading the research and engineering teams that build Satori's DataSecOps platform. Prior to founding Satori Cyber, Yoav was the Senior Vice President of Product Development for Imperva, which he joined as part of the acquisition of Incapsula, a cloud-based web application security and acceleration company, where he was the Vice President of Engineering. Before joining Incapsula, Yoav held several technology leadership positions at SAP. Welcome, Yoav.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Fern. Really excited to be here, and great information and insights so far. So, hey everyone, really thanks for joining. I'd like to share with you what we're seeing on the market, what we're hearing from the companies we talk to, and how our solution addresses data security and governance challenges in the modern data infrastructure. But you know what? Let's start with a quick survey, a quick poll on your main cloud analytics data storage technology. So we have here Amazon Redshift, Snowflake Data Cloud, Google BigQuery, Azure Synapse, or maybe another platform. Why don't you take a second and submit, and we'll get the results. Okay, so let's see what we have here. Oh, incredible. So Redshift, Snowflake, not a lot of BigQuery in the audience, but I see a good amount of Azure Synapse. This is interesting and pretty much aligned with what we see as well. So let's kick this off and talk about Satori. So Satori is a DataSecOps platform, data security operations, that helps companies streamline access to data in the cloud by solving security, privacy, governance, and compliance obstacles, making more data available to the people who need it. Satori is a VC-backed startup. We operate on the intersection of data and cybersecurity. Both myself and Eldad Chai, my co-founder, have spent the last decade together helping some of the world's largest companies move their applications to the cloud. And what we're seeing now in the data space, a lot of similarities from how applications move to the cloud now that data is moving from the data center into these cloud-based data platforms that you mentioned in the poll. Since founding the company, we've been working with some really awesome leaders from really awesome companies like Intuit and Nike and Nielsen and others on removing obstacles for democratizing data and promoting data-driven innovation. So data and cybersecurity are not just a focus area for these really great companies. They're everyone's focus. And as you can see in a recent survey by Gartner, according to CIOs and technology executives, investment in data and cybersecurity, BI and analytics, and cloud platforms is top of mind in where these leaders are planning to invest. When we double click on that and talk to data engineering teams, we find that the governance and compliance challenges are the main obstacles for data-driven innovation when dealing with sensitive data sets. And if I go back to the beginning of Fern's presentation and the types of data companies are processing and storing, most of these will be considered sensitive in some context or another. So really, the sensitivity of data is ubiquitous, and the underlying problem with implementing the governance and compliance controls is that security with the current tools that we have today really really doesn't scale. So before I go into Satori and what specifically we do, I want to ask another question to the audience. How are you currently implementing governance and compliance controls in your data infrastructure? So think about these cloud analytics platforms that you mentioned before. So is it like a manual process driven by data engineers configuring the native features that you get out of the box with these platforms? Do you have some sort of a homegrown automation process based on the native capabilities? Are you leveraging a vendor solution to do that, or perhaps feeling that you're not doing enough in that space to implement these controls? So let's take a few seconds, feel that, and see the results. Okay, so pretty even, Steven, across the board. A lot of investment in manual processes, vendors, and probably not doing enough. So yeah, aligned with what we see on the market, I think our vision is, what we see from our data is that we see more homegrown solutions, or at least companies trying to build homegrown solutions. Very challenging. Not a lot of them are successful in that strategy. So let's talk about the problem space from how we here over at Satori see it. So we talked about security doesn't scale, and that's basically because the modern data infrastructure that these modern data analytics platforms, security has been left behind a bit. That is pretty much expected given the fact that these are relatively new platforms. And most of the focus in the past decade has been, while building these platforms, was on addressing the operational challenges of loading data into these platforms, storing it, processing it, querying it, reporting on it. So a lot of the basic use cases had to be built before folks would start to be concerned about the security of these environments, which is very, very natural dynamics. So today, data is exploding into these data clouds, lakes and warehouses. Data and analytics are democratized and integrated into almost every domain. More people are using more data, which is awesome. We get more data-driven decisions. We get data-driven innovation. But managing all the data and the usage of it is still, in a lot of cases, done manually through database administrators, data engineers, configuring ad hoc functionality. And IT and database teams are quickly becoming a bottleneck, while the rest of us are struggling to answer like simple questions such as, who has access to what data? Are we protecting our sensitive data? And where should we put our controls in this complex environment? So these questions and challenges triggered the emergence of DataSecOps platform, which it's a new discipline. It's similar to DevOps. So this time the idea is to bring together not just developers and operations like in DevOps, but in DataSecOps, we talk about people and process for data, operations, security and governance, and data consumers, both from the technology side of the organization and the business side of the organization. So DataSecOps is a discipline that allows companies to streamline access to data while solving the security, privacy, and governance challenges. Imagine you could move away from all of these cumbersome permissions to a streamlined process that provides just-in-time access workflows with complete transparency and automation, and having all of that enabled in real time without having to rely on manual processes, tickets, and folks that need to configure stuff to get all the access granted and revoked. So Satori is a DataSecOps platform, and we enable this frictionless journey to provide visibility and control. The core idea is to simplify access controls for sensitive data without changing the data infrastructure. So one of the key lessons that the Satori founding team brings from our decade-long experience as operators is that companies want to get the security and privacy and governance value out of their solutions, but they're not really inclined in re-architecting their environment just to get that. And so that's kind of like fed our design process for the Satori solution. So Satori is a solution that keeps track of all of your sensitive data. We maintain a data inventory dynamically, going back to the CSA framework that Fern mentioned. Inventorying your sensitive data is one of the key controls and points to think about when governing your sensitive data. So we keep a data inventory completely dynamically in an automated way. We classify data automatically, and we tag it, and we monitor all of the data flows that you have in your system, your data environment in real time. We're a solution that also enforces granular policies like dynamic masking and row-level securities and other really interesting types of controls on access to data without having to code or make any changes on the data infrastructure, which is, it's kind of like an important point because one of the main things we've heard from the organizations that we work with is that they prefer to have a solution that is decoupled from their data model. At some point, building all the security and privacy controls on top of the data model with views or secure views or other types of policies on the database itself becomes kludgy, becomes hard to maintain. Let's talk about how Satori really works. So it's quite simple, actually. The concept is really neat. Satori is a transparent data proxy. It's a SaaS solution that you position between your data consumers and your data stores. On the left-hand side, you see data consumers like analysts, data scientists, or applications. And on the right-hand side, you see your data stores. Being that transparent proxy, we're able to analyze the users, their queries. We're able to analyze the data as it's returned in real time from the data store and classify it and apply these policies at any granularity without having to change anything in the user experience. That's really, really key. Another aspect is we wanted to have companies be able to drop in Satori in an existing environment and having their thousands of users with hundreds of dashboards on their BI tools move to be monitored and controlled by Satori without having to change anything on the BI tool or rebuild the dashboards. So that was a key point for us as well. So with this approach, Satori provides ongoing visibility into all the data access in the environment, as well as apply the controls in a universal way. So if you have, and most of the organizations we talk to have more than one type of data platform, and they operate in more than one cloud platform, then with Satori, they're able to define a policy once and have it applied across any of their data stores, across any of their clouds, from a single pane of glass. And it really helps managing the policies in a less technical way, in a more business-oriented way, in a way that is very easy to maintain over time. So the two unique and powerful aspects of Satori, as I mentioned, easy drop-in. So it doesn't require the organization to change anything on how users access data. It doesn't change anything on how data is stored, configured on the databases. So that's great. The second is, being a proxy, we're able to do that automatic data classification in real time and policy enforcement. So things like dynamic masking and row-level access controls that really don't require a lot of maintenance over time. And that's an important point. Don't overload the data store with the overhead of implementing these controls on the query engine, which is optimized for retrieving data and returning data, not really optimized for implementing these types of controls that companies are looking for to implement. One of the last, I think the last slide is talk about one of our reference customers. It's a company called Innovaccer. It's a US-based health tech company, and they leverage Satori to address security, compliance, and governance challenges in a very complex environment. So Innovaccer's mission is to connect and curate the world's healthcare information to make it accessible and useful. And to support that mission, Innovaccer is collecting massive amounts of sensitive data. Think about patient data, think about health records, and it delivers it to many types of data consumers. When we started working with Innovaccer, they were looking for a solution to help them control access to that health data. We call that PHI, personal health information, across multiple clouds. They were working on AWS and considering expanding into Azure, and across multiple data technologies. So the first phase of the implementation focused on Amazon Redshift, but then it quickly expanded into Postgres and Redshift and SQL Server and so on. The Satori approach was really appealing to them because they didn't have to re-architect their environment and how they work with data. And their environment and architecture is always constantly evolving as well. So by having something that is decoupled from the data infrastructure really helped them move faster on their customer acquisition strategy and their technology roadmap by expanding into more clouds and more data platforms. We were there day one when they did their Snowflake evaluation, and that has been, Satori has been an enabler for their process. They're deploying a Satori data access controller. That's the proxy piece of the system in each one of their cloud regions that they operate in, and they're able to monitor employee access to health data immediately, and then also enforce policies without impacting their data operations. So today, they operate around 10 data access controllers and more than 120 databases on the Satori service. And you know, it's freeing up their internal teams, data teams, to focus on their core, which is to provide data for the business and not just and not spend too much time focusing on implementing the security controls and privacy and compliance that they need in order to safeguard their environment. So that's it from my side. I really want to thank everyone for tuning in. Brenda, over to you.
Thank you very much, Yoav. Let's go ahead and move into our Q&A period now with the audience and get some questions answered. Let me go ahead. I'm gonna start with this one for Fern. The question that came in, is the CSA framework the only one for cloud security controls?
No, it's not. It's not the only one. It's a good one. There are other ones. For example, ISACA, which used to be the EDP Auditors Association, they have the COBIT framework, and I think that they've extended into the cloud. Also, it's broad. There's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. They have a framework also that is useful. I mean, I think it's a good idea. I mean, there's obviously books on the topic, of data security in the cloud, so it can often make sense, if you're trying to find a framework or, trying to put this together, to look across, different sources and put together what makes sense for your organization.
Great, thank you. We'll send this one to Yoav. How does Satori handle semi-structured data like JSON or XML?
So it's a really good question. What we're seeing is that a lot of companies are opting to store semi-structured data where it makes sense for their operations inside the data analytics platform. It's really convenient for them to do so because then they don't have to worry on providing a schema for that data on write. They can do schema on read, and it's more convenient and more flexible. However, it poses a challenge when you want to understand what type of data do I have in that column. Is that sensitive data, and what happens if I have multiple types of data in a JSON document within a column? So this is something that we built support for early on. And so we are able to both classify and dynamically mask data inside these semi-structured formats and support that kind of tool that data engineering teams are more and more using these days.
Perfect, thank you. There's another one for you all. Who actually deploys Satori solutions? Is it geared more to IT or security professionals or both?
So I would say it's Satori brings together both IT, security, and data engineering on the same page. We typically sell into data teams, and they bring in. So it could be like the VP of data engineering or the chief data officer, and they get support from internal IT or DevOps teams for the deployment where that is necessary. And security are always accompanying the process, and they're providing feedback on policies and really want to get the value of monitoring and auditing the environment. But I would say who actually deploys and leads these projects, these are data teams.
All right. Next question, see if we can get through another one or two here before we run out of time. So Yoav, what are the most common security controls you see organizations implementing?
So the two most common ones we see are dynamic masking. So when you have a sensitive data set and you want to dynamically anonymize that data according to the person accessing that data, that's a very big one, dynamic masking. The second one is row-level access controls, where when two different people access the data, they might see a different subset of the data. Typically, it's very appealing to have these controls because otherwise you'd have to duplicate the data set into multiple data sets, one for each usage pattern. And quoting one of our customers, which we talked to last week, and that person said that data duplication is the root of all evil on the data infrastructure. And with the volume that companies are processing today, duplicating the data is not a successful strategy to implement these types of controls.
Very good. Here's another. You mentioned that Satori is a SaaS solution, software service solution. Do you also have an on-prem version?
Yes. So Satori has 3 deployment options. First one is a complete SaaS solution. You don't have to deploy anything on your environment. Really convenient when you're working with cloud-based SaaS offerings, data platforms like Snowflake or Google BigQuery. We do also offer 2 private deployment options. One is a private SaaS offering. It's still a SaaS solution, but it's owned, managed, and operated by the Satori operations team. And we also offer a customer-hosted version of Satori. All of these are have the same feature set and but different operating models and ownership.
Very good, thanks. So at this time, we have come to the end of our time. Thank you for all that information and getting to those questions. And let me take a moment to thank our speakers today. We, of course, heard from Fern Halper with TDWI and Yoav Cohen with Satori. Also, a big thank you to Satori for sponsoring today's webinar. Please remember that we did record today's webinar, and we'll be emailing you a link to an archived version of the presentation. Feel free to share that with colleagues if you'd like. And also, if you'd like a copy of today's presentation slides, use the click here for a PDF line to access that. Lastly, I want to remind you that TDWI offers a wealth of information, including the latest research, reports, and webinars about BI, data warehousing, and a host of related topics. So I encourage you to tap into that expertise at tdwi.org. So from all of us here today, let me say thank you very much for taking the time and attending today's webinar. This does conclude today's event.